Hey, everybody. Welcome into the back room. I'm Andy Ostroy. We have former Deputy Press Secretary at the Defense Department, Sabrina Singh, back with us today. We'll chat with Sabrina in just a second. But first, thanks for tuning in. We appreciate you listening, and we'd love to hear your comments. So email us at backroomandy@gmail.com and or post on our social media, and we'll read some feedback next time. And if you like the podcast, please rate and review and follow or subscribe, and you'll be notified every time we post a new episode. So, Sabrina Singh is a veteran strategist with 15 years of experience advising national leaders on crisis communications, strategic messaging, and policy issues. In addition to frequently appearing on international and national broadcast TV and digital platforms, she's advised senior leaders at all levels of government, including members of the U.S. House and Senate, governors, the Secretary of Defense, and the Vice President of the United States. Most recently, she served as a Deputy Press Secretary at the Department of Defense and also served as an advisor to Secretary Lloyd Austin. Sabrina, welcome back into the back room.
Hey, it's good to be back with you in the back room. Good to see you.
Yeah, so what a crazy week. I want to get right into it. So in your experience working at the Defense Department, is it your opinion that the details provided in this Signal text chat, the date, time, location, targets, aircraft, weapons, would normally be considered highly sensitive, secretive, and classified information?
Yes. I mean, without a doubt, this is the definition that is actually in ODNI's guidance, in the Department of Defense's guidance, in how Joint Staff operates. Anything that is information before an operation is conducted is considered highly classified information, sometimes all the way up to top secret. And the fact that you had a signal thread of the entire national security apparatus talking about an operation before it's even begun is talking about moving classified information, which sits on a completely separate system and server. And there's even, if you print out classified information, it goes into separate binders than it does from unclassified information. We're talking about someone, the Secretary of Defense, moving that classified information into a text group thread, a commercial app that you, myself, anyone can have. And so, yes, that information unequivocally was classified information.
And to keep this simple for the folks at home, on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the magnitude and impact of this screw up?
I mean, I think from my perspective, and I think from any other regular, operating government that operates under, normal order, this would be a 10. I mean, this is a breach. This is a spill of classified information into a unsecure system. And I think if this were any other DoD, state, White House employee, what you would see happen is this person or these people would have been immediately placed on leave, administrative leave, and there would have been an immediate investigation, probably by the Inspector General at each agency, and then, of course, by Congress, because that's what this demands. It demands the highest amount of scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. And have you ever been aware of such a conversation of this nature taking place over an unsecured, easily hackable, non-government message app like Signal?
Certainly not during my time, during the previous administration. What is scary about this conversation is I don't think it was the first time that this has happened. So I'd be curious to know what other conversations like this exist on phones. And candidly, when I was in the Biden administration, we didn't have Signal on our work phones. When I was in the Vice President's office, when I was in at the Department of Defense, I wasn't allowed to download Signal. So it begs the question, is Signal or some of those folks in that chat, are they using it from their personal phones? Because that also is not allowed by federal statute.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you're raising, because do you think this is just the tip of the iceberg in the sense that this particular chat was labeled Houthi PC small group? Yeah. Is it possible that there are other PC small groups discussing other very sensitive classified attack plans over Signal as well?
I mean, I think that's what begs the question. And there have been operations that the Department of Defense have conducted in the Middle East. And also, I believe there was a recent one in Somalia. And, these are operations that are done by putting our men and women in uniform on the front line, risking their lives to protect the United States, our interests, and our allies. And so if there are other groups like this where the entire national security apparatus is talking about an operation, I think that warrants Congress to look into what else is out there. Who engages in these signal threads from their personal phones, from their work phones, from their work computers, and why can't they use these classified systems, which I know there are complaints about, having to physically, go to a different computer, sometimes in a classified room called a SCIF.
Mm-hmm.
The reality is it is done that way to protect our men and women in uniform who are putting their lives on the line. And what you saw Pete Hegseth do was risk that. And so I think Congress definitely needs to look into this, definitely needs to see what else is on other people's phones and, prevent this from happening in the future.
So can you explain for us specifically how
Yeah.
and why a fiasco like this exposed our military personnel to grave danger?
Yeah, absolutely. So Signal is an app like that anyone can download on their phone. It's a commercial app that you can just get through your app store. And even though it is encrypted, that doesn't mean that it is safe from hackers or our adversaries from getting access to these messages. So what happened was, as now this infamous SignalGate, group thread has become public, and that's because a reporter was inadvertently added to it. What makes this chat so problematic is you have the entire national security team on an unclassified, unsafe texting app.
Mm-hmm.
And what makes it even worse is, Mike Walls, he's the national security advisor. He started this signal thread because of his stupidity and his recklessness. He added a journalist. That's like a separate bucket to address.
Mm-hmm.
The real concern here and why I believe Pete Hegseth deserves the most scrutiny is because what Hegseth did was he put the timeline, literally the sequence of events, the timing, the locations, the aircraft, and when these strikes were going to occur against Houthi controlled areas in Yemen. And those are military operational plans. You never discuss those in an unclassified setting. And here's why. Because before an operation happens, usually you have our pilots, our fighter pilots up in the air, getting ready and preparing for that operation. They can be hours up in the air, sometimes it's minutes. You also, for this operation, had our ships getting ready to engage. So if an adversary had been able to intercept those text messages and just say they got those text messages and were able to sell them to Iran or an Iranian backed group like the Houthis could have adjusted their force posture. They could have found out the location of our fighter jets, and they could have potentially shot down one of our pilots. And the Houthis have those capabilities. They have
Mm-hmm.
the ability to shoot down aircraft from air. So what Pete Hegseth did, the Secretary of Defense, is he put at risk our men and women in uniform who were flying those planes that day, and our sailors that were also operating in those waters. So under any other administration, heads would roll.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we're dealing with a different type of administration, and so it's really important to acknowledge and to know. Even though they're trying to say that this was not classified information, it absolutely was.
And what about the impact it has on our allies and
Yeah.
other overseas partners?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that because look, no country has been immune to leaks before, right? Like when I was serving in the Biden administration, we had an airman who decided to take photographs, pictures on his phone and of top secret slides and upload them to a gaming platform called Discord.
Mm-hmm.
Countries all around the world, there are bad actors who do stupid things or do it intentionally and put at risk our national security. A leak like this is coming from the National Security Advisor, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, the Director of Intelligence, the CIA Director, and including on that thread, the Vice President of the United States and the
Mm-hmm.
Chief of Staff to the President. So, why is this so damaging? How can allies trust that the topmost levels of this government won't put at risk their own security? And I think that is going to be the true fallout here, because of course, anytime there's a leak of classified information, that causes harm, that causes damage to our partners and allies. But when it comes from the very top levels, the people that can pick up the phone and call their counterpart and talk through something, this has put a lot of strain on those relationships.
Mm-hmm. And the administration's position is that the mission was a huge success, and that's all that should matter. But that's like saying we didn't need a search warrant because when we broke in, we found the evidence and caught the
Right.
killer. Or, yeah, I know you asked me to drive your daughter home and I was shit faced, but hey, we got home okay. We didn't crash. Nothing happened. And that's all that should matter. Like, this is insanity, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think it's two separate buckets, right? Like the mission was a success because our men and women in uniform are the best of the best.
Hmm. Right.
And they are able to conduct these operations and they prepare for them and they train for them. And that in itself, of course, should be celebrated. And no one is taking away from that. What we are concerned about is the operational details that put those brave men and women at risk. And
Hmm.
so I think it's, the administration wants to talk about how different this was from anything that had ever been done, which it's patently false. That's not true. They did have a wider range of targets than we did during when I served at the Department of Defense. But fundamentally, what they did was target the same type of targets that we were targeting, and so that's fine. That's again they're degrading Houthi capabilities. That's a good thing. They're taking terrorists off the map. That's a good thing. Let's applaud that. But you can't try and word salad your way out of the fact that you not only put our military at risk, but you just moved classified information, very sensitive information, to a commercial texting app, and then just kind of sent back these emojis back and forth and think like it's total normal operating standard procedure because it's not. It's just not.
Yeah, I mean the ends justify the means philosophy just
Right.
doesn't work in a society that is governed by the rule of law, nor should our Defense Department and our military operate under that because it's a very slippery slope. I mean, where
Right.
would this administration go if it can do things like this? And I made a joke, but it's like, hey, it doesn't matter how we got in and found the evidence. We caught the bad guys. That's not how it works. I mean,
Right.
murderers get set free because the judge goes, "Wait, you didn't read the Miranda rights?" Like that's how we operate in this country. So it is kind of surprising. They're also saying, it wasn't classified. It was attack plans versus war plans. Does any of that stuff matter with the level of this specific information that we now know was leaked?
Yeah, so I think what's happening here, and what the administration, I think, tries to do very effectively, and sometimes is very effective at, is parsing words and getting into the semantics. Look,
Hmm.
the way the Atlantic and the way the reporter characterized these plans, war plans, I wouldn't say is the right word to use. That doesn't matter. These were still, it's what matters is the content. This was
Hmm.
sensitive military operational plans about an impending operation that, oh, by the way, the Trump administration said that this was going to continue out for days.
Hmm.
So not only did you put at risk, the pilots that were going up for that operation, if these messages had intercepted, it showed the cadence of how, our F-18s were going to move, how the MQ-9s were going to move, how the Tomahawks were going to be deployed, when the bombs were going to drop. So they kept bragging that this was going to be a sustained bombing effort for days. Well, I mean, you just gave one part of the playbook away. So, if I'm an adversary and I'm looking at this, I'm going to adjust, my force posture because you just gave me insight to how the United States, sequences some of their operations.
Hmm. And will there be accountability here? Like who should be fired? Should Waltz go?
Yeah.
Should Gabbard, Ratcliffe, Hegseth, all of them? Like who? Somebody's head needs to roll, right?
Look, I think there's a lot of scrutiny on Walls. Personally, I think that is deserved. I mean, creating this text thread, not being even smart enough to check the numbers in the thread, not knowing that there's a reporter in the thread. I mean, that just like raises general questions of, are you like, what are you doing? in my opinion, the person that, really needs to go is Hegseth, because not only did your entire job as a Secretary of Defense is to protect our men and women, and of course, to work across the interagency to defect American citizens here at home and abroad. And he put our military at risk. So I think fundamentally there's that point. Two, I mean, it is a crime to move any type of sensitive classified information down into an unclassified platform without authorization. And I know that they're saying, well, the Secretary of Defense has the authority to declassify. Not before an operation. Operational security, what we call OPSEC, is fundamentally important to protecting the lives of the men and women about to conduct those operations. And what makes it worse is that someone like Pete Hegseth constantly brags about his military record, which is great that he served, and applaud him for that. And because of that, because of the fact that he served, he knows these rules. He knows how sensitive this information is to operational security. So he certainly knows better. And I think not only, he should go, but there has to be an investigation, because there has to be a look into from Congress on, why were these phones being used? Which phones were being used? Has this happened before? And greater sense of awareness of how, we can never have this happen again. So how do we go forward? How do we move forward?
And there's talk about violations of the Espionage Act. There's also talks about violations of records laws. I mean, he put it into, the messages would disappear in a week or 6 days or 2 weeks,
Correct.
or whatever.
Yeah.
Do you think there were laws that were broken here? And should somebody end up going to prison, as we've seen in the past with much lower level people who have done stuff like this?
Look, there needs to be accountability. What that means and is determined to that. Why I don't want to weigh in and say this needs to happen or that is because I believe in the process, and I think the process needs to play out. To me, accountability means going through that process. I think certainly if this had been a DoD employee, not only would they be placed on leave, but there probably would be criminal charges being looked at. But that's really for the process to play out. I think in terms of what this means for next steps, Congress really needs to have the authority to scrutinize everyone on that text thread. I mean, the vice president, the president's chief of staff. How was no one an adult in the room and saying, hey, this doesn't even comply with the Presidential Records Act for the agencies. This doesn't comply with, the ability for journalists and others to FOIA, especially if you are using your personal phones. And when I was at, the vice president's office or the Department of Defense, if someone texted me on my personal phone, I had to screenshot that and upload that image to my email because there is this importance of preserving these records.
Last quick question. You can give a very quick answer. You've been around this game. You were Deputy Press Secretary of the Defense Department. You know how these stories either disappear quickly or gain momentum. Does this story have legs? Is it not going away?
I think that this administration is incredibly disciplined at being undisciplined. They are very good at being able to change the narrative, being able to throw other things out there. And there's a lot of things that they're doing that deserve scrutiny, like, some of these deportations and some of, nonviolent legally holding, green card holders, like some of those things, I don't think anyone is shedding a tear over violent criminals being deported. I don't. But there are people here legally that are just doing their job and paying taxes, and they don't deserve that. So I think this administration, just going back to your question, is very good at throwing everything out there and trying to distract. I think it's very important that Democrats stay disciplined on this, and Republicans. I mean, this should be a bipartisan issue. The safety and well-being of our service members should be something that both sides can come together on. I hope this doesn't die down, But, Democrats do not have that leverage in Congress right now to hold these investigations. It would need to really be those Republican colleagues that move this forward. So my hope is there's some accountability here, at least some, very harsh lessons learned. But I hope this is not just a day one, day two story and goes away, because at the end of the day, we're talking about the well-being of the people that put their lives on the line, and they deserve accountability too.
Yeah, well, Senate Chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Roger Wicker, is calling for an independent, Inspector General investigation. So that's a promising sign, but we'll see how it goes. It's certainly going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. Sabrina, thanks for coming back on, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Andy. Good to be with you.
Likewise. Take care. This episode of The Back Room was edited and produced by me, Andy Ostroy. It was co-edited and co-produced by Maddie Rosenberg, and co-produced by Jen Hammoud. Our theme song was composed by Andrew Hollander, and our logo was designed by Cricket Langell. And special thanks to Patricia Wind. Please take a moment to rate and review the podcast, and also follow or subscribe. Until next time, keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and have a great week.